سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. Welcome to this lecture, which is the fourth lecture in this series, in this course, Applied Linguistics, with me, Dr. Ahmad Alsagoafi. We have spoken in the third lecture about the native speaker, the issue of the native speaker, and what that actually concept includes, and what factors have to be identified in order for you to be called a native speaker, and what things we have looked at: the personal history, we have looked at the expertise, the issue of knowledge and loyalty to the community you are living in. And we have said that these were not enough. In fact, we talked also about in the 20th century, the common practice in that at the time, which was the grammar translation method. And before that, in fact, we talked about English as a lingua franca. But going back to the grammar translation method, we said that students were taught grammar rules by actually translating them into their own language. They were taught grammar through English grammar through Arabic. The vocabulary also were translated into Arabic. So everything was done in the students' own language, because that was the way into the students, into language learning. So in order to master a language, or to be successful in that language, you've got to master the grammar rules and the vocabulary, rather than focusing on effective communication. This method focused on grammar and translation activities. We have said that this has actually led other people to criticize the grammar translation method and to come up with a new method, which is called the direct method. The direct method here has come actually in response to the comments and shortcomings about the drawbacks of the grammar translation method, and it tried as much as possible to avoid them. So because there were new types of students, immigrants, business people, and tourists, created a new kind of classroom population. As we said that because there was a number of people who, because of war or because of natural disasters in their countries, they have immigrated, or because the economy was bad in their country, because could be of the political situations, social, economic, political situations in their country. They have immigrated to the United States to find a better life. This immigration actually has led them to, or it was important for them to learn English in order to be able to communicate with that community. Other people, as we said, business people, were also among this group of people who learned English. So they learned it in order to do business. Tourists, when you go outside, when you want to visit a country, you've got to have basic knowledge of that language. You know what those words mean in English. Students in this method did not necessarily share the same first language. So because it was actually a response, as we said, to the grammar translation method, in which the student's own language was the main, actually, language dominant in the class, Arabic and English, but Arabic was dominant all the time, or most of the time. Here, the student's own language was not used. So the students, they did not necessarily share the same first language. So first language explanation and the translation were not possible. In order to explain a grammar rule, you do not speak Arabic. Grammar rule in English, you do not speak in Arabic. In order to know a vocabulary, you don't have to translate it into Arabic. The meaning is explained to you through photos, pictures, diagrams, whatever, but or definitions, or you get it from the context, but the element of translation was not, in fact, possible at the time. Hence, the direct method was advocated, in which the students' own languages were banished, and everything was to be done through the language under instruction. As a teacher, I've got to teach you everything in English. Whether you understand it or not, this is the principle of this teaching method. Is that only English should be used in school. Or otherwise, as what we will see here in Berlitz Schools, for example, microphones were monitored, and teachers could be fired for uttering a single word in a student's own language. So as a teacher, you must speak in English. Otherwise, you will be fired. Because in this method, which is the direct method, it was called direct because they said that in order for a student, what do you want the students to actually do? They said that we want them to speak in English. They said, okay, so go directly to that goal, which is let them speak in English. Do not let them translate rules, translate vocabularies, and do not explain rules of English to them in Arabic. So English language policy was actually introduced into second language learning centers or classes, and foreign language maybe centers. Everything was to be done through the language under instruction in English. So success here was to be measured instead by the degree to which the learner's language proficiency approximated to that of the native speaker. Success was not actually measured by the degree of or by the number of, for example, vocabulary that you know in English, or the number of rules that you can apply correctly in English. No. Success was based upon proficiency, which is approximated to that of the native speaker, which was acceptable at the time, the issue of native speaker, because they said, well, what is our criteria? What is our benchmark here? Sorry, what is the benchmark? We want our students here to be like the native speakers of that country. So you've got to teach them. You've got to, in English, you've got to be all the time speaking in English. You should not permit any student to speak or any teacher to speak in his or her own first language. That actually method, which is the direct method, has established a concept of language learning very different from that implicit grammar translation. knowledge of a language was no longer an object of scholarship attainable simply by hard work. So as we said, that success, in order to be successful, you've got to be like the native speaker. This led the way to further changes in both popular and applied linguistics ideas about how a language might be learned, and that has actually led the applied linguists and the educationalists, people who were interested, psychologists, people who were actually interested in education or were working in the field of education, to change their views. And they said that, well, this is not actually going to work. We have got to change this method, which is the direct method, and adopt a new one, which is the natural language learning. It is an approach, in fact, in which an adult learner can repeat the route to proficiency of the native speaking child. So it is learning a language, according to them, is simulating the way the child of that language has learned it. As an adult, I've got to follow the same route in order to be a native speaker, or like a native speaker, I've got to follow the same or repeat the same route of proficiency of that native speaking child. Learning would take place without explanation or grading, and without correction of errors, but simply by exposure to meaningful input. So learning was at ease. Students were not punished for making errors, and grading was not actually, they were not graded on what they were saying or writing and whatever. So they said that in order to actually let them learn, let them do as the children of that language has or had done in their learning or while they were learning. So this is the natural approach. It was believed at the time that neither explicit instruction nor conscious learning had any effect. Its view of second language acquisition was derived directly from mainstream linguistics research into child first language acquisition. As we said, that they have looked at how the child learned the language, and they said, well, that was effective. Okay, how that child learned the language, let it be for adults. Let that way be applied. Let that way be applied to adults who would like to learn the language. So this approach suggested that learning need not involve hard work. Students were, as I said, at ease. Okay, you learn the language at ease. You make mistakes, we are not going to deduct any marks. You make errors here when you write, spelling mistakes, grammar rules when you produce. You say she go, he go, that's fine. You will learn it anyway. You will learn the language. We will correct you later, but at this stage, no. Go ahead. So they wanted to give the students confidence. Actually, at roughly the same time as the development of the natural approach, there emerged a far more durable new movement in the field of applied linguistics, known as the communicative approach. That was actually, I mean, the natural language learning was criticized heavily. And that's why this approach was introduced, the communicative approach. It has rapidly became and still, in fact, remains the dominant orthodoxy in progressive language teaching. The theories behind it have had a profound and far-reaching effect, not only in language teaching, but in many other applied linguistic areas too. So it's not just in teaching, but also in other applied linguistic areas. Like, for example, my field, language testing, tests were or are based on the communicative language approach. You are teaching the students through this approach. You should test them or assist them through this approach. So this is how the other areas of applied linguistics were affected by that or influenced by the communicative language teaching or approach. The emphasis here, unlike the other approaches, was on meaning-focused activities. And the focus was primarily and necessarily social, for the purpose of achieving a successful communication, which was ignored in most of the teaching methods that were actually dominant at the time, and that some of them were banished, have vanished, but some of them, even up until today, I've seen some classes who are still using the grammar translation method. So here the emphasis on meaning-focused activities. Students do activities that they are going to use outside the class, that those activities were not actually mechanical in terms of just put is, just put es, just put here ing when you have is, am, are, when you have the verb to be. This is not the case here in the communicative approach. There was a shift of attention also from the language system as an end in itself to the successful use of that system in context. So focus was in getting the students to be able to communicate, not getting them able to get the language right. My ultimate aim is that they should communicate with the native speakers of that country. So that's why, hence it was called the communicative approach. My focus is not on form, it was on communication. The focus is not on es, s. When do you put s, when do you put es? When do you put is, when do you put am? No, you don't focus on these tiny bits of the language. Language was, as I remember my supervisor told me, chopped out, or chopped off like this, like chopping onions. Language should not be like this. Language should be treated as a whole. You learn the whole language. You do not chop it like this. And you say, well, this is past tense, this is past continuous, this is past perfect and stuff. No, they said, no, the whole tense should be put in a passage. All of these tenses should be put in a passage, and the students should read it, and then they will be able to recognize that type of tense or activity. So the focus has shifted from form to communication, and using language in context, which is the most important thing. Language learning success is to be assessed neither in terms of accurate grammar, as we said, and pronunciation for their own sake, nor in terms of explicit knowledge of the rules, but the ability to do things with the language appropriately, fluently, and effectively, knowing which language to use in this context. When I am at the bank, for example, when I am at the when I want to make a conversation with a dentist, when I want to make a conversation with the postman in the post office, when I want to make a conversation in order to open a bank account in the bank. What type of language should I use? So this was the meaning of appropriate language. Teachers and materials designers were urged to identify things learners need to do with the language, i.e. conduct a needs analysis. We mean by this that they were asked to have a list of what students needed and simulate these in the classroom. So in order for the students to be taught real world, activities here in my class, I've got to know what is the outside world, how does it look like, and I need to identify my learners' needs. What do they need to do with the language? Is it English for specific purposes, English for academic purposes, English for occupation, as we are going to see now here. This shift of emphasis had consequences at both the macro level of syllabus and curriculum design, and at the micro level of classroom activity. So we have two levels. Macro, which is big, the big actually impact was on the syllabus and curriculum, and the micro was in the classroom activity. At the macro level, there has been the development of English for specific purposes. So this is what we mean by needs analysis. We want our students to actually be prepared for what they are going to do in the future. If they are going to be, for example, doctors here in hospitals, I need to prepare them for English for medical students, or for English, for example, computer science, English for nurses, English for, let me say, for example, agriculture, people who are going to study agriculture, and so on and so forth, which tries to develop the language and discourse skills which will be needed for particular jobs. I'm also here preparing you to be proficient in your language. For example, let's say that you are going to work in Aramco company. There is a course, English for occupational purposes, to prepare you which language that you should use in order to survive in that context. You need to survive. That was actually survival. Those survival courses were offered to students in order to be able to make communication between them and the people of that language, or for particular fields of study. English for academic purposes. I teach you, for example, English for academic purposes. Here we are. I'm teaching the essay course, which is actually depending mainly on a book called Writing English for Academic Purposes. So we are teaching you English, but it's not any type of English. It's the academic genre. It's the kind of language that you are going to use in research, and for example, writing journals and writing, assignments in English, which should look like, which should be in the form that is accepted here, in the college. So English for academic purposes. At the micro level, what happened here? There has been the development of task-based instruction, TBI, in which learning is organized around tasks related to real-world activities, focusing the students' attention upon meaning and upon successful task completion. So the tasks that were introduced to students were meaningful. They were not just, wallahi, for example, but SES. That was not meaningful at all. Meaningful, I mean you make conversation. Complete this conversation. Meaningful, meaning that you guess the meaning from the context of that word. I did not translate it for you at all. So this is how tasks should be built and how tasks should be actually prepared for the students who are learning the English language as English as a second language or English as a foreign language, where our focus is on the students' attention upon meaning and upon successful task communication. It's not just about task completion, it's also about meaning here. So language, it was argued, is best handled all at once, as we said already, as it would be in the real world, as this is the learner's ultimate goal. So if you want to learn language, when I make communication, I mean with somebody else, I do not say, oh, is it ES or is it S that I have to add here? No, you speak the language unconsciously. And once you have learned, I mean, those rules of grammar, and you have understood them, you will start applying them when you speak. And they say that you are going to see them here in the reading passage, for example, or when you listen to, I mean, a conversation between two people in a bank or a post office or somewhere else. They are actually chatting about something. The tense that is going to be used or that the teacher wanted to teach to their students, to his students, was actually taught implicitly. It was not taught explicitly. I do not say, today I will teach you past tense. No. I give you a passage, you read it, we identify what is a past perfect. But that should not be our focus. I mean, the whole class should not be spent on just one or two tenses or whatever. No, it should be based or should be spent on meaningful tasks and activities that students do in the class. This is actually the last method in our lecture, and I would like to say something here about the communicative approach. Actually, it is still the dominant approach of language teaching. It has, by the way, received fierce comments as well from people in the field of applied linguistics and from other fields. But it is still much better than the other teaching methods. I would advise you as a for people who are going to be, for students in this course who are going to be teachers, inshallah in future, choose the suitable method for your students. But I put it between inverted commas here. But please ask your students to do meaningful activities. Our aim is not to teach them about grammar. Our aim is not to teach them vocabulary in our language. We teach them grammar, we teach them vocabulary, but not through Arabic. Speak English most of the time in the class. Try to give them activities which are meaningful. And once they do an activity, or you give them a sentence which is not actually related to the outside world. No, try to bring something relevant to what is happening outside, what the students are interested. This is called the needs analysis. What is my students actually are thinking of at the moment? They like technology. They are impressed now by the new media here, Twitter, Instagram. I should actually bring some activities on some sentences. Students, for example, a sentence, are posting their photos in Instagram. You give a passage, reading passage about this, and some people agree and some people disagree. Is this wallahi okay? Is this not okay? And you try to discuss it with your students. But if you have got a large number of students in your class, it's going to be difficult for you to make such a thing. But try as much as possible, as I said, to make sure that your ultimate aim is being achieved, which is the communication with the other people in the other language. This is what I wanted to say in this lecture, and I thank you very much for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.